So, welcome to Plodcast, episode 108. Great to have you with us. So, I want to talk a little bit about the transsexual thing, and I don't want to talk so much about the whatever that temptation is, or whatever the desire is to be the opposite sex, or to dress like the opposite sex, or to undergo surgery, or whatever. That's not the striking thing about this. We've always had people in every generation, every era. We've always had people that wanted to go in that kind of direction. That part is nothing new. What is new is the culture-wide hysteria, the collective hysteria over the subject, such that recently I think he was an actor or some sort of, I think he's an actor. He commented that he thought allowing 3-year-olds to make decisions about their gender identity was a bit young, don't you think? You know, it's not, look, we don't let them buy tobacco at that age. We don't let them buy whiskey at that age. We don't let them get tattoos at that age. So why on earth would we let them decide, I would like to be a girl, or I would like to be a boy, or if someone approaching adolescence starts taking puberty blockers, how is that not child abuse? Adolescence is not a disease. All right, adolescence is not a disease. Now, like I said, there have always been people who are mixed up and confused and disoriented, and there are people that struggle with gender dysphoria and all that. That's not the issue. The issue is that's not where the hysteria is. The hysteria is in the public outcry. This guy who said, man, I don't think 3-year-olds ought to be making that decision. He was forced to apologize for his hateful conduct, for his hateful speech. And the only way you can get someone to apologize for saying something that is manifestly normal, manifestly reasonable, is if the whole country has gone mad. Basically, Twitter, news outlets, all the places where people look for responsible discourse, they start yelling at this guy, and so he backs down. He backs away right away. What that means is that the country, as a country, has lost its mind. The country, as a country, has lost its mind. We've not lost our mind because we have people in it who want to be the other sex. We've always had that. That's not anything new. What's new is the society at large deciding uniformly that if you want that, then you are to be affirmed, and anybody who thinks that you shouldn't want that, they are the diseased one. They are the sinful one. They are the wicked one, and they are the ones that we're going to come down on. So we're dealing, and now the good news is this: every form of collective hysteria, and that's what this is. We're talking about rapid onset gender dysphoria, where all of a sudden, all the kids at school are talking about it, and all of a sudden your kid is talking about it, and where did this come from? And so we've got this rapid onset thing. Well, 20 years ago, we weren't talking about this at all. 10 years ago, we weren't dealing with this. And anybody who predicted that we would be talking about this would have been dismissed back in the day as an alarmist, right? But here we are. Our whole society has gone over the edge of a cliff. We are in the midst of a collective hysteria. Now, that means that when the spell breaks, well, first thing, being of this nature, being an emotional fit, being a hysterical reaction across the whole culture, that means that that's not sustainable. That's not going to stay. The fit is going to pass. And when the fit passes, people are going to say, what were we thinking? What was that about? Unfortunately, they're going to say, what were we thinking? What was all that about? With people who still have 60 years of life ahead of them, maimed by doctors who were after a quick buck. It's just, and that's some people. They're not participants in the hysteria at all. They just have their eye on the main chance. But the virulent reaction that people get when their faith in this sort of thing is challenged, nothing but hysterics. Always will be God. All right, continuing podcast episode 108. We are in our hamartiology section. Our study of the various Greek words for sin or sinful activities. The word apistos is rendered in a number of different ways, but all of them relate to the sin of unbelief. We've been looking at a number of different words that are related to this particular sin, the sin of not believing or the sin of unbelief. Paul refers to those that believe not in the context of marriage. A Christian spouse is not bound if he or she has a husband or wife who doesn't believe and who does not want to remain married. That's 1 Corinthians 7, 12 and 13. If you're married, if you became a Christian and your spouse isn't interested in this at all and doesn't want to be married to a Christian, Paul says, don't sweat it, let them go. The same word is rendered as unbelieving 3 times in the next 2 verses. That's in 1 Corinthians 7, 14 and 15, still referring to the non-Christian spouse. If someone who believes not invites a Christian to a feast, he should certainly feel free to go. 1 Corinthians 10:27. So don't worry about what they're going to serve you. Don't worry about the meat. The meat is not demon-possessed, even if it was offered to an idol. Don't worry about that. If you want to go to the feast, then go. The gift of tongues was given for those who believe not, 1 Corinthians 14:22 and 24, while prophecy is for believers. We can see the impact of a right use of these gifts if an unbeliever comes into the service, 1 Corinthians 14:23. And I'll just say in passing that the tongues were a sign for the unbeliever, and this is all taken from Isaiah 28. Isaiah says that when you hear a strange language being spoken in the streets of your city, this is a sign of military judgment. You didn't understand when I was prophesying to you in English. Maybe you will understand it when I prophesied to you in Russian. That's the import of Isaiah's prophecy in Isaiah 28. Then on the day of Pentecost, the gift of tongues is given, and the streets of Jerusalem are full of people speaking in other languages, which was a sign of judgment on Jerusalem, which is why in 1 Corinthians 14, Paul says that it's a sign for unbelievers. The word is translated as unbelieving in 2 places. Nothing is pure for the defiled and unbelieving, Titus 1:15. The lake of fire is reserved for, among others, the unbelieving, Revelation 21:8. Another rendition is faithless, and we have one example of this from each gospel. When his disciples could not heal a demon-possessed boy, Jesus lamented his perverse and faithless generation. That's in Matthew 17:17, Mark 9:19, Luke 9:41. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus told Thomas not to be faithless, but rather to believe. That's in John 20, verse 27. The word can also mean unbeliever. The servant who abuses the others will be assigned a portion with the unbelievers. Luke 12:46. The apostle was appalled that the Corinthian Christians were willing to go to law against each other before unbelievers. 1 Corinthians 6:6. We are not to be yoked together with unbelievers. 2 Corinthians 6:14. And the same word is rendered as infidel in the next verse, 2 Corinthians 6:15. And a man who does not care for his own family is worse than an infidel, in 1 Timothy 5:8. So the God of that age had blinded the minds of those who had not believed, 2 Corinthians 4:4. And in one place, Paul uses the word to refer to a thing incredible, Acts 26:8, referring to unbelief in the resurrection. Why do you think it is an incredible thing or an unbelievable thing? So there you go. Okay, so for my book review this time around, I want to review a book that I'm sure I reviewed earlier in all of these podcasts, but I'm going to do it again. And the reason I'm going to review this book again is because I just finished reading it again. I don't I have a lot of books to read, and I have a stack I want to get through, and so consequently, if I reread a book, if I read and reread and go over again, that says a lot. I I can only point to a handful of books that, oh, that was so good. You get done with it, and you go right back to the first page and you start over. John Piper's God is the Gospel was like that for me. I just read it, and then I started reading it again. Certain books repay repeated visits. This is one of them. The book I'm referring to is Planet Narnia by Michael Ward. Planet Narnia, Michael Ward. I read this a number of years ago. I read it when it first came out, and really, really enjoyed it. I would put Planet Narnia in my top 5 books I've ever read. It's just a wonderful book, so informative and so helpful in understanding Lewis and the way he approached the whole subject of Narnia. It's just a great book. Loved it. I just recently went through the book again. This time I listened to it on Audible. So the first time I read the book, and then Michael Ward also wrote a sort of a street level version of the same book called the Narnia Code. If you want to get his thesis and you don't have a lot of daylight to burn, get the Narnia Code. The Planet Narnia is a scholarly work, but it's accessible. It's not dense. You can read it. It's not full of jargon. It's not stuffed full of jargon. It's a wonderful book. So then I listened to it, and just a few days ago, a week or so ago, finished listening to Planet Narnia again. For those who are unfamiliar with the basic thesis, Lewis loved the medieval cosmology. He wrote a book. It was actually a series of lectures turned into a book. His book, The Discarded Image, is a detailed scholarly discussion of the medieval cosmology, the sun, moon, planets, and all of that. And then in the Ransom trilogy, he has a lot of the features of the medieval cosmology embedded in the narrative of the Ransom trilogy. He was interested in in promulgating his understanding of cosmology to modern readers, and he did it in his prose, and he did it in his nonfiction prose, and he did it in his fiction. Well, Ward's thesis, and it's his thesis, I call it a thesis. I would describe it as slam dunk compelling. His thesis is slam dunk compelling. Is that there are seven Narnia books, and and each book is presided over by the spirit of one of the 7 planets. So Jove, for example, is the presiding Jupiter, or Jove is the presiding deity over The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The Horse and His Boy is presided over by Mercury, or Hermes. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there it is right in the title, is presided over by the Sun. The Silver Chair is presided over by the Moon. Prince Caspian is presided over by Mars. The Magician's Nephew by Venus. And The Last Battle by Saturn. And so you might think, oh, there's something to that, just by having someone tell you that, because the flavor or the atmosphere of each book is they're all very different. What Michael Ward does is he takes a word, coins it, sort of coins a word, or applies it to this, and he calls it Donegality, named after County Donegal in Ireland, a place where Lewis loved. And Lewis was very interested in the atmosphere of a place. So the Donegality is the way the whole thing feels. So Mars is the god of war, and he's also the god of woods. So woods and war are very much a feature of Prince Caspian. In the silver chair, when they're down below in Underland, you remember they go by Father Time. In an earlier manuscript, that was Saturn, and Saturn stands up and squeezes the sun in the last battle. That's a very Saturnine approach, and the silver. The Saturnine book is the last battle, but Saturn himself makes an appearance in the silver chair. The silver chair is governed by the moon, and the color silver is part of this. Luna is also the god of that presides over lunatics. Prince Rilian is out of his wits, and when he's in his right mind, he's actually acting like a lunatic, and so you've got that double feature. So what Ward is doing is he's explaining why J.R.R. Tolkien thought that the Narnia stories were basically a hodgepodge, that Lewis would just sort of lick his pencil and ta-da, look, Ma, no hands. And he would just crank them out, and he threw all these, he threw everything in the fridge into the crock pot to see what would happen. And what Ward shows is that it looks like a hodgepodge. And if someone says it's a hodgepodge, yeah, you can see what they're talking about. But there's this internal coherence, an internal consistency to all the books that make the books work. Nonetheless, the books really do work. And why do they work, despite the hodgepodginess? Well, they work because there is a deep artifice, a deep craft in all of them. And you're going to come away from Narnia knowing a whole lot more about Narnia than you ever did before if you read this book. And you're going to learn a whole lot about our world as well.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with podcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.